The gunshot echoed across the barren prairie as Gabriel Evans dropped to one knee, his rifle still smoking in his weathered hands. The lone wolf that had been stalking his cattle for days lay motionless in the tall grass. Sweat trickled down his dust-covered face as he squinted against the merciless New Mexico sun. It had been the 5th day straight of riding the boundaries of his struggling ranch, and the hollowness in his stomach reminded him that somewhere along the way, food had become an afterthought. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new life that had drawn Gabriel west from Boston 7 years ago now seemed like a cruel joke. The drought had withered his crops, rustlers had thinned his herd, and the recent death of his father had left him alone with a mountain of debt and responsibilities that threatened to crush what remained of his spirit. Gabriel stood, his legs unsteady beneath him as he mounted his dun-colored horse. The world tilted strangely around him, but he dug his heels in anyway, determined to finish his patrol before nightfall. Another mile passed, then 2, the rhythm of the horse's hooves beneath him becoming hypnotic. His vision blurred at the edges. When the horse suddenly reared, Gabriel's weakened grip failed him. He tumbled backward, the ground rising up to meet him with unforgiving force. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was a cloud of dust on the horizon and the silhouette of an approaching wagon. Grace Sullivan had been on the trail for 3 weeks, her wagon loaded with everything she owned in the world. At 26, she had buried both her parents to influenza back in St. Louis and decided there was nothing left for her there. Her father's pharmacy had provided enough money from its sale to purchase supplies, and a modest plot of land near Silver Creek that a government agent had assured her was perfect for homesteading. As she guided her team across the seemingly endless expanse of prairie, she spotted something unusual in the distance, a riderless horse circling anxiously near what appeared to be a fallen figure. Grace's heart quickened as she urged her team forward. "Whoa there," she called to her horses, pulling back on the reins as she approached the scene. The man lay motionless, his face baked red by the sun, lips cracked and bleeding. Grace jumped down from her wagon and knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers against his neck, relieved to find a pulse, though it was rapid and weak. "Sir, can you hear me?" She shook his shoulder gently, noting the fine quality of his shirt beneath the layers of dust and sweat. Gabriel's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "My cattle," he mumbled, attempting to rise. Grace placed a firm hand on his chest. "Lie still. You're in no condition to be moving." With considerable effort, she managed to help the tall, lean man into her wagon, propping him against her trunk of belongings. His horse followed obediently as she led them toward the creek she'd spotted earlier. The water glittered invitingly in the afternoon sun, a rare blessing in this parched landscape. After setting up a simple camp, Grace filled a tin cup with water and returned to the semi-conscious man. "Small sips," she instructed, holding the cup to his lips. Gabriel drank greedily until she pulled the cup away. "Slowly, or you'll make yourself sick," she admonished. "When was the last time you ate?" He squinted up at her, seeming to truly see her for the first time. Her auburn hair was pulled back beneath a sun-faded bonnet, but tendrils had escaped to frame a face that, while not conventionally beautiful, possessed a quiet strength that commanded attention. Her green eyes regarded him with a mixture of concern and practicality. "I don't recall," he admitted hoarsely. Grace shook her head, exasperation evident in her voice. "You forgot to feed yourself for days, didn't you? Well, sit. You'll do them no good half-starved." Gabriel blinked, perplexed. "Do who no good?" "Your cattle, your ranch, whatever it is you're killing yourself over," she replied, already turning to the small fire she'd built. A dead man tends nothing. There was something about her straightforward manner that cut through the fog in his mind. Gabriel watched as she efficiently prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork from her provisions. The scent of food awoke a hunger so fierce it was almost painful. "I'm Gabriel Evans," he said, his voice still rough. "My ranch is about 5 miles east of here." "Grace Sullivan," she replied without looking up from her cooking. "Heading to my new homestead near Silver Creek." Gabriel tensed. "Silver Creek? That's not good land, miss. Whoever sold it to you cheated me, I imagine," she finished for him, a rueful smile touching her lips. "I suspected as much when the price seemed too reasonable, but it was all I could afford." She handed him a plate of food, and it took all his willpower not to devour it in seconds. "Thank you," he managed between careful bites, "for the food and, well, likely for my life." "Just eat slowly," she cautioned. "Your stomach will have shrunk." They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in spectacular hues of orange and purple. Gabriel felt strength seeping back into his limbs with each bite, and with it came a clarity that had been absent for weeks. "That land at Silver Creek," he said finally. "It's bordered on the south by my property. The soil's rocky, but the water access is good. With the right planning, you might make something of it." Grace's eyes brightened with the first genuine optimism he'd seen. "Truly, the agent in St. Louis showed me a picture of rolling meadows." Gabriel couldn't help the short laugh that escaped him. "I'd wager those meadows were somewhere in Kansas. Silver Creek scrubland is honest, though. Works if you work it right." "Well," she said with a determined lift of her chin, "working things right is what I intend to do." As night fell completely, Gabriel insisted on taking watch while Grace slept. His mind was clearer now, and the gravity of his recent behavior settled uncomfortably upon him. He'd been pushing himself to the brink since his father's passing 3 months ago, trying to save a ranch that had been struggling even before the drought hit. In the soft glow of the campfire, he studied the sleeping woman who had saved him from his own foolishness. There was something arresting about her practical nature, her lack of pretense. Most women of his acquaintance in Silver Creek town were either hardened by frontier life or desperately clinging to Eastern refinements that had no place in the territory. Grace Sullivan seemed neither. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that suggested education and breeding, yet displayed a pragmatism that would serve her well in these unforgiving lands. Morning arrived with a spectacular sunrise that set the horizon ablaze. Gabriel woke from a brief doze to find Grace already preparing coffee, her hair loose around her shoulders as she worked. The sight stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in a very long time. "You should have woken me for my turn at watch," she chided, handing him a steaming cup. "You needed the rest more than I," he replied, "and I was feeling much improved thanks to your ministrations." Grace assessed him with a critical eye. "You're still too pale, and I'd wager you've lost a stone of weight you couldn't afford to lose. How far did you say your ranch is?" 5 miles east. I can make my way, I'm heading that direction anyway," she interrupted. "I'll take you home, make sure you get a proper meal, and then continue to my property." Something about her tone suggested arguing would be futile, so Gabriel simply nodded. As they broke camp and prepared to move on, he found himself oddly pleased at the prospect of showing her his land, humble as it had become. The journey to Gabriel's ranch took them through rolling hills that gradually gave way to a modest valley, where a simple but well-built cabin stood. A small barn and corral completed the homestead, with cattle visible in the distance. It wasn't grand by any means, but it represented 7 years of Gabriel's life, his dreams and his struggles. "Evans Ranch," he said with a hint of pride that surprised him. After weeks of viewing it as a burden, seeing it through fresh eyes made him remember why he'd fallen in love with this place. Grace took it in with an appraising gaze. "It's lovely. You've done well for yourself." "Not as well as I should have," he admitted. "My father and I had bigger plans, but the drought hit hard these past 2 years." He helped Grace down from her wagon, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. The sensation of her beneath his palms stirred something warm in his chest. Inside the cabin, Grace immediately took charge, ignoring Gabriel's protests as she set about preparing a more substantial meal from his meager pantry. "When was the last time you went to town for supplies?" she asked, frowning at the nearly empty shelves. "Been a bit preoccupied," he said sheepishly. "There's a root cellar with some preserved goods, though." While she cooked, Gabriel cleaned himself up, shaving away the unkempt beard that had grown during his days of neglect. He changed into fresh clothes, feeling more human with each passing moment. The scent of cooking food drew him back to the main room, where Grace had somehow transformed his simple ingredients into a hearty stew. She'd also found time to tidy the cabin, which had fallen into disarray during his grief-stricken state. "Sit," she commanded when he entered, pointing to the table she'd cleared of papers and debris. Gabriel obeyed, watching as she moved around his kitchen with surprising ease. "You seem comfortable here," he observed. Grace shrugged. "A kitchen is a kitchen. My mother taught me to keep a proper home alongside my father's lessons in pharmaceutical compounds. An unusual education for a young lady." Her expression softened at the mention of her parents. "They believed a woman should be prepared for any circumstance life might present. Father wanted me to take over his business someday." She set a bowl before him. "But circumstances change." As they ate, Gabriel found himself sharing the story of his journey west, his father's dreams of building a cattle empire, and the setbacks they'd faced. Grace listened intently, occasionally asking insightful questions that revealed her sharp mind. "And since your father passed?" she asked gently. Gabriel's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "It's been difficult. The bank in Silver Creek holds the note on half the herd. If I can't make the payment next month, I'll lose everything we worked for." "Is that why you've been running yourself ragged? Trying to do the work of 3 men by yourself?" He nodded, feeling strangely vulnerable under her perceptive gaze. "I let go of the ranch hands 2 months ago. Couldn't afford to pay them." Grace considered this information thoughtfully. "Well, Mr. Evans, it seems to me you have 2 immediate problems. You need help with the ranch and you need money to pay the bank." "An astute assessment," he said with a wry smile. "Any solutions to offer alongside it, perhaps?" She met his eyes steadily. "I know nothing about ranching, but I'm not afraid of hard work. I also have some savings that could help with your bank note." Gabriel stared at her in disbelief. "You can't be serious. We barely know each other." "I couldn't consider it an investment," she interrupted. "I've spent 3 weeks traveling to claim land that, by your own admission, is barely workable. Meanwhile, you have established grazing land but lack the manpower to maintain it properly. What are you suggesting?" "A partnership, Mr. Evans. I help you save your ranch, and in return, I get a share of the proceeds once it's profitable again." Gabriel leaned back in his chair, studying the determined woman across from him. "It's a generous offer, Miss Sullivan, but ranching is grueling work, especially for a woman." Her eyebrow arched dangerously. "I crossed half the country alone, Mr. Evans. I believe I can learn to manage cattle." "I was going to say for someone with no experience," he corrected, unable to suppress a smile. "But point taken." They talked late into the evening, hammering out the details of their unlikely arrangement. Grace would contribute her savings toward the banknote, and help with the day-to-day operations of the ranch. In exchange, she would receive a 20% share of the profits once the debt was cleared, plus the use of a small cabin on the property that had originally been built for the foreman. "It's not much," Gabriel warned as he showed her the one-room structure the following morning. "But it's sound, and closer to town than your Silver Creek plot would have been." Grace surveyed the simple cabin with its stone fireplace and small window overlooking a meadow dotted with wildflowers. "It's perfect," she declared. "I'll move my things in today." And so began an unusual partnership. The first weeks were a trial for them both. Gabriel discovered that while Grace was indeed a quick study, teaching someone the basics of ranch life required patience he wasn't sure he possessed. Grace, for her part, found the physical demands more taxing than she'd anticipated, though she never complained. Their first major challenge came when it was time to mend the boundary fences before moving the herd to fresh pasture. Gabriel showed her how to repair the barbed wire, his hands guiding hers as she learned to twist the sharp metal into place. "Like this?" she asked, her face inches from his as they bent over the fence post. "Perfect," he murmured, suddenly aware of the floral scent of her hair beneath its coating of dust and sweat. He stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "You're a natural." Grace smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face and sent an unexpected warmth through Gabriel's chest. "I've had an excellent teacher." They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, slowly bringing order back to the ranch. Gabriel found himself watching her when she wasn't looking the determined set of her jaw when she tackled a difficult task. The gentle way she tended to a newborn calf, the quiet humming that accompanied her work in the evenings. For Grace, the ranch became a sanctuary she hadn't realized she was seeking. The grief of losing her parents began to soften as she built a new life with purpose. She found herself looking forward to the early mornings when she and Gabriel would share coffee on his porch, planning the day's work as the sun crested the eastern hills. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of moving cattle to higher pasture, they sat on that same porch watching a spectacular thunderstorm roll across the distant plains. Lightning illuminated the massive cloud formations, creating a dramatic display against the darkening sky. "I never saw anything like this in St. Louis," Grace said, her voice hushed with wonder. Gabriel nodded. "It's one of the reasons I stayed, even when things got difficult. The land gets in your blood." She turned to look at him, noticing how the past weeks had restored him. His face had filled out, the haunted look in his eyes replaced by a quiet confidence. The bond between them had grown into a comfortable friendship that was increasingly laced with something deeper neither was ready to acknowledge. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For letting me be part of this." She gestured to the vast landscape before them. "Most men would have laughed at my proposition." Gabriel's eyes held hers. "Most men would be fools to turn down help from someone as capable as you, Grace Sullivan." The sound of her name on his lips sent a pleasant shiver through her. It was the first time he'd called her by her first name. "Besides," he continued with a slight smile, "I believe it was you who saved me, not the other way around." The storm moved closer, bringing with it a sharp drop in temperature and the promise of much-needed rain. As the first heavy drops began to fall, they retreated inside, where Grace had prepared a simple but satisfying dinner. Over the meal, Gabriel brought up something that had been on his mind. "The Silver Creek Independence Day celebration is next week. The whole county turns out for it." Grace nodded. "I saw the notices in town when I went for supplies. I was thinking we might attend. The ranch is in good enough shape now to spare us for a day and—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. It would be a proper way to introduce you to the community. What he didn't say was how much he wanted to see her in something other than work clothes, to perhaps dance with her under the stars to the fiddle music that always accompanied such gatherings. "I'd like that," Grace replied, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Though I'm afraid I haven't much suitable for a celebration. There's a dressmaker in town, Mrs. Hollister. Perhaps you could visit her tomorrow, consider it a ranch expense." He smiled at her startled expression. "You've worked harder than any hand I ever hired, Grace. You deserve something nice." The next day, Grace rode into Silver Creek with a flutter of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Mrs. Hollister's shop was small but well-stocked, and the older woman greeted her warmly. "So you're the mysterious lady who's been helping Gabriel Evans," she said with undisguised curiosity as she measured Grace. "The whole town's been wondering about you." Grace felt her face grow warm. "We have a business arrangement. I'm investing in the ranch." Mrs. Hollister's knowing smile suggested she didn't entirely believe this explanation. "Well, whatever you call it, it's good to see Gabriel coming back to himself. He was in a dark place after his father died." As the dressmaker pinned fabric around her, Grace found herself asking questions about Gabriel's past, learning that he'd been considered quite the catch before hard times hit the ranch. The son of a successful Boston businessman, he'd come west against his family's wishes, determined to make his own way. "Broke more than one heart in this town," Mrs. Hollister confided, "but never seemed to give his own away. Too busy with that ranch of his." 3 days later, the dress was ready, a lovely creation of blue cotton that brought out the green in Grace's eyes. It was simpler than the fashions she'd worn in St. Louis, but perfectly suited to a country celebration. The morning of Independence Day dawned clear and bright. Gabriel had finished his chores early and spent an unusual amount of time on his appearance, trimming his beard neatly and donning his best shirt. When Grace emerged from her cabin in the new dress, her hair arranged in soft curls beneath a modest hat, he felt his breath catch. "You look—" he began, then faltered, searching for words adequate to the transformation before him. Grace laughed, the sound like music in the clear morning air. "I believe the word you're searching for is clean, Mr. Evans. A rare state for both of us these days." "Beautiful," he corrected softly. "The word is beautiful, Grace." The blush that colored her cheeks was answer enough as he helped her into the freshly cleaned wagon. Silver Creek was transformed for the celebration. American flags hung from every building, bunting decorated the bandstand in the town square, and tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes brought by families from miles around. Children ran laughing through the crowds, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. As Gabriel helped Grace from the wagon, he was immediately aware of the curious glances cast their way. Nodding to acquaintances, he guided her through the throng with a hand lightly at her back. "Gabriel Evans, as I live and breathe." A robust woman in her 50s enveloped him in a hug. "We'd about given you up for a hermit, Mrs. Donovan," he greeted her with genuine warmth. "Allow me to introduce Miss Grace Sullivan, my—" He paused, suddenly unsure how to describe their arrangement. "Business partner," Grace supplied smoothly, extending her hand. "Mrs." Donovan's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline as she shook Grace's hand. "Well, that's a new one. Business, is it? How interesting." Throughout the afternoon, Gabriel introduced Grace to what seemed like every resident of Silver Creek and the surrounding ranches. Some, like the Donovans, greeted her with barely concealed curiosity. Others, particularly the unmarried women, assessed her with thinly veiled suspicion. But by the time they had shared a meal and Grace had contributed her mother's recipe for apple cobbler to the dessert table, most of the community had warmed to her. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the square, and the local musicians took their places on the bandstand. The lively strains of fiddle and banjo filled the air as couples began to form for dancing. Gabriel turned to Grace, extending his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Sullivan?" Her eyes sparkled in the lantern light as she placed her hand in his. "I thought you'd never ask, Mr. Evans." He led her to the makeshift dance floor, acutely aware of her warm hand in his, the subtle fragrance of lavender that surrounded her. As his arm slipped around her waist for the waltz, he felt as though something long dormant within him was awakening. Grace moved with surprising grace for someone who had spent the last month doing ranch work. "You dance well," he commented as they swept around the square. "My mother insisted on lessons. She said every young lady should know how to waltz, even if she intended to become a pharmacist." "A wise woman, your mother." The music shifted to a livelier tune, and they joined in a reel that left them both breathless and laughing. As the evening progressed, Gabriel found himself reluctant to relinquish Grace to other partners, though propriety demanded he do so. He watched from the sidelines as she danced with the blacksmith's son, her face animated as she chatted. "She's a fine woman, Gabriel." He turned to find Sheriff Thomas Cooper beside him, nursing a cup of punch. "She is indeed," Gabriel agreed. "And not just a business partner, I'd wager," the sheriff added with a knowing look. "Not the way you've been watching her all evening." Before Gabriel could respond, a commotion at the edge of the gathering drew their attention. 3 men on horseback had arrived, their stance suggesting they had already visited the saloon extensively before joining the celebration. "Trouble," Cooper muttered, setting down his cup. "The Patterson brothers." Gabriel tensed. The Pattersons were notorious troublemakers whose ranch bordered his to the north. There had been accusations of cattle rustling in the past, though nothing had ever been proven. "Well, if it ain't the high and mighty Gabriel Evans," the eldest Patterson called out, swaying slightly in his saddle. "Heard you got yourself a pretty little partner these days." Gabriel stepped forward, positioning himself between the newcomers and the dance floor where Grace was still engaged with her partner. "Evening, Frank. This is a family celebration. Why don't you boys head back to the saloon?" Frank Patterson's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Public gathering, ain't it? We got as much right to be here as you." His gaze shifted, focusing on something behind Gabriel. "And I believe I'd like to meet this lady partner of yours." Gabriel turned to find Grace standing behind him, her expression concerned but not fearful. "Miss Sullivan, may I present Frank Patterson and his brothers? They're neighbors." "A pleasure, gentlemen," Grace said with cool politeness. Frank dismounted, moving with exaggerated care as he approached. "The pleasure's all mine, Miss Sullivan. Perhaps you'd favor me with a dance." Before Gabriel could intervene, Grace replied, "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Patterson, but I was just telling Mr. Evans that I'm feeling rather tired." We were about to depart. Frank's face darkened. "Seems mighty unfriendly, turning down a simple dance. Especially when you've been spinning around with every other man here." Sheriff Cooper stepped forward. "The lady said she's tired, Frank. Best respect that." A tense moment passed before Frank shrugged elaborately. "Another time, perhaps." His gaze shifted to Gabriel, hardening. "Been meaning to talk to you anyway, Evans. About that north pasture of yours. My cattle keep finding their way there, through that broken fence section." Gabriel's jaw tightened. The fence had been deliberately cut twice in the past month, something he and Grace had spent days repairing. "Funny how they manage that, considering we fixed that fence thoroughly." "Well, it seems to need fixing again," Frank replied with a smirk. "Unless you'd consider selling that section. It's not doing you much good anyway with your herd shrinking like it has been." The implied threat was clear, and Gabriel felt a surge of anger. Before he could respond, Grace's hand slipped into his, a calming presence. "Mr. Evans is not interested in selling any portion of his ranch," she stated firmly, "and we'll be checking that fence line first thing tomorrow." The younger Patterson brothers snickered, but Frank's expression turned calculating as he looked between Gabriel and Grace. "Well now, isn't that interesting? Seems like the lady speaks for you these days, Evans." Sheriff Cooper moved closer. "I think it's time for you boys to move along. This is a peaceful gathering." With a final contemptuous glance, Frank remounted his horse. "We're going. But this conversation ain't over, Evans. That north pasture would look real good with Patterson cattle grazing it." As they rode away, Gabriel released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I'm sorry about that," he said to Grace. "The Pattersons have been a thorn in my side since I arrived." "You think they're the ones cutting your fences?" He nodded grimly. "Almost certainly. They've had their eye on that pasture for years. It has the best water access in the area." Grace's expression was thoughtful. "Then we should definitely check it tomorrow." She squeezed his hand, which she was still holding. "But for now, I believe we were dancing." The incident with the Pattersons cast a brief shadow over the evening, but as the music resumed and Gabriel held Grace in his arms for another waltz, his concerns receded. There was something about her steady presence that made even long-standing problems seem more manageable. As promised, they rode out to the north pasture at first light the next morning. Sure enough, a section of fence had been cut, allowing access to the creek that ran through Gabriel's land. "This is deliberate," Grace said, examining the clean cuts in the wire. "And recent." Gabriel dismounted, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage. "Third time in as many months. Patterson's hoping to wear me down, force me to sell." Together they repaired the fence, working in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher in the sky. When they finished, Gabriel suggested they rest by the creek before heading back to the ranch house. They sat beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree, sharing water from Gabriel's canteen. The peaceful gurgle of the creek and the rustle of leaves overhead created a tranquil atmosphere that belied the morning's discovery. "Why is this particular pasture so important?" Grace asked, trailing her fingers in the cool water. Gabriel leaned back against the tree trunk. "It's not just the water, though that's valuable enough. This creek feeds into the river that borders Patterson's property. If he controlled this land, he'd have water rights that would triple the value of his ranch. And he's willing to resort to sabotage to get it. The Pattersons have never been known for their scruples. Frank's father was run out of Texas for branding other men's calves. The sons are cut from the same cloth." Grace was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps we should consider setting a trap." Gabriel turned to her in surprise. "A trap? If they're cutting the fence regularly, they'll likely return. What if we were waiting for them next time?" "That could be dangerous, Grace. The Pattersons aren't above violence." She met his concerned gaze steadily. "Neither am I when necessary. My father taught me to shoot before I was 12. Gabriel couldn't help the laugh that escaped him. "You continue to surprise me, Grace Sullivan." "Good," she replied with a smile that warmed him more than the summer sun. "I'd hate to become predictable." They spent the next hour devising a plan to catch the fence cutters in the act. It was during this conversation, heads bent close together over a rough map Gabriel scratched in the dirt, that something shifted between them. Perhaps it was the shared purpose, or the isolation of their surroundings, but when their eyes met, the air seemed charged with unspoken possibility. Gabriel found himself reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind Grace's ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Grace!" The crack of a rifle shot shattered the moment. the bullet splintering bark from the tree inches from their heads. Gabriel reacted instinctively, pulling Grace to the ground and covering her body with his own as a second shot kicked up dirt nearby. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing the revolver he always wore when riding the boundaries. He fired back in the direction of the shots, more to provide cover than with any hope of hitting the unseen assailant. Grace's breathing was rapid beneath him, but her voice was steady. "My rifle's in the saddle's scabbard." Gabriel nodded, assessing the distance to their horses, which had shied away at the gunfire but not bolted. "I'll go, you stay hidden." "No." Her hand gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Together, on three." There was no time to argue. At her count, they sprinted for the horses, Gabriel firing twice more to cover their movement. Grace reached her mount first, pulling the rifle free with practiced ease and taking up position behind the animal's bulk. "I see him," she called, "in the brush near that rock outcropping." Gabriel squinted in the direction she indicated, finally making out the barrel of a rifle protruding from behind a boulder about 200 yards away. Before he could respond, Grace sighted down her rifle and fired. The shot was answered by a cry of pain and a flurry of movement. "I think I winged him," she said with grim satisfaction. They watched as a figure emerged from behind the rocks, clutching an arm as he scrambled onto a waiting horse and galloped away. "That was Lyle Patterson, the youngest brother," Gabriel said, recognizing the distinctive paint horse. "You're a better shot than you let on." Grace lowered her rifle, her face pale but composed. "I aimed for his arm. I've never shot a man before, but I wasn't about to let him shoot you." The significance of her words hung between them in the suddenly still air. Gabriel moved toward her slowly, as if approaching a skittish colt. When he stood before her, he gently took the rifle from her hands and set it aside. "Grace Sullivan," he said softly, "I believe you may have just saved my life." Her eyes met his, wide and still bright with the remnants of fear and exhilaration. "We saved each other." He wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly his arms were around her and her hands were clutching the front of his shirt. Their lips met in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with all the emotion of the past weeks, the growing admiration, the unspoken attraction, and now the shared danger. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since Independence Day," he confessed. "Only that long," Grace teased, though her voice was unsteady. "I've been waiting since you showed me how to mend fences." Gabriel laughed, a sound of pure joy that seemed to release weeks of tension. "We should get back to the ranch. Patterson will likely go running to his brothers, and I don't want to be caught out here if they decide to return in force." They rode hard back to the ranch house, taking a circuitous route to avoid any potential ambush. Upon arriving, Gabriel immediately set about fortifying the property, checking ammunition supplies and securing the livestock in the nearest pastures. Grace moved with equal purpose, preparing food and filling water barrels in case they were besieged. Neither spoke much, but they moved around each other with the coordinated efficiency of partners who had come to anticipate each other's needs. As night fell with no sign of the Pattersons, they allowed themselves to relax slightly. Seated at the kitchen table with cups of coffee, they began to discuss their next move. "We should ride into town tomorrow, speak to Sheriff Cooper," Gabriel suggested. "Attempted murder will get even the Pattersons locked up." Grace nodded. "We'll need to be careful on the road. They might try to ambush us." The casual way she included herself in his plans, the natural assumption that they would face this threat together, struck Gabriel profoundly. In the few short weeks since she had found him collapsed on the prairie, Grace had become essential to him in ways that went far beyond their business arrangement. "Grace," he began, reaching across the table to take her hand. "What happened today? It changes things." She met his gaze steadily. "Yes, it does. Not just the shooting," he clarified, "though that certainly clarified some matters for me. Such as," Gabriel took a deep breath, "such as the fact that when I thought we might be killed today, my greatest regret was that I hadn't told you how I feel about you." Color rose in Grace's cheeks, but she didn't look away. "And how is that exactly? I love you." The words, once spoken, seemed to have been waiting just beneath the surface for weeks. "I love your strength, your intelligence, your determination. I love how you face every challenge head-on. I love watching you with the animals, seeing you ride across the pasture at sunset, hearing you hum while you work." Tears gathered in Grace's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Gabriel Evans, for a man who nearly starved himself from neglect when I met him, you've become remarkably articulate." He laughed, squeezing her hand. "You haven't answered me." "Haven't I?" She rose from her chair, moving around the table to stand before him. When he looked up at her, she framed his face with her hands. "I love you too. I think I have since you taught me to ride the boundaries, proud and patient even when I made every mistake possible." Gabriel pulled her onto his lap, cradling her against him as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "Marry me," he whispered against her hair. "Be my partner in everything, not just business." Grace leaned back to search his face. "Are you certain the ranch is still struggling, and the Pattersons, the ranch will survive because we're stronger together?" he interrupted. "As for the Pattersons, they've been a problem long before you arrived. I won't let fear of them dictate our future." Her answer was another kiss, deeper and more promising than the first. When they finally separated, both breathless, Gabriel couldn't help the broad smile that spread across his face. "Is that a yes, Miss Sullivan?" "It's a yes, Mr. Evans," she confirmed, her eyes sparkling. "Though I warn you, I still know nothing about birthing calves." "We'll learn together," he promised, pulling her close once more. The following morning they rode into town side by side, alert for any sign of the Pattersons. The streets of Silver Creek were quiet as they made their way to the sheriff's office, where they found Cooper drinking coffee at his desk. He listened gravely to their account of the shooting, making notes in his ledger. "Lyle Patterson with a bullet wound would be hard to miss," he commented. "But I haven't seen any of them in town since the celebration." "They might have gone to ground," Gabriel suggested. "Their ranch is remote enough." Cooper nodded. "I'll ride out there today, see what I can find. In the meantime, you two should be careful. The Pattersons have friends, and they know how to hold a grudge." As they left the sheriff's office, Gabriel placed a protective hand at the small of Grace's back, guiding her toward the general store. "We need supplies if we're going to be holed up at the ranch for a while." Grace smiled up at him, the sun highlighting the auburn in her hair. "Always practical, Mr. Evans, though perhaps we should also visit the minister while we're in town. Make arrangements." The joy that filled Gabriel at her words made the threat of the Pattersons seem distant and unimportant. "Mrs. Hollister would never forgive us if we didn't give her time to make you a proper wedding dress," he teased. 2 weeks, Grace decided. "Enough time for a dress, but not so long that I might change my mind." Gabriel pulled her into the shadow between buildings, stealing a quick kiss that promised much more. "As if I'd give you the chance." The next fortnight passed in a whirlwind of activity. Word of their engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, bringing a stream of visitors to the ranch despite the potential danger. Mrs. Donovan arrived with a basket of preserves and knowing looks. The blacksmith and his wife brought a hand-forged iron bed frame as an early wedding gift. Even the banker, Mr. Hargrove, paid a call to offer congratulations and, more practically, to discuss extending Gabriel's loan now that the ranch had proven so productive under joint management. Of the Pattersons, there was little news. Sheriff Cooper had found their ranch seemingly abandoned, though signs suggested a hasty departure rather than a planned trip. Rumors placed them in Arizona territory, perhaps lying low until Lyle's wound healed and the shooting incident blew over. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, the September sun casting a golden glow over the land. Gabriel stood on his porch, surveying the ranch that had nearly broken him 4 months earlier. The cattle were healthy, the crops harvested, and for the first time since his father's death, he felt genuine hope for the future. In Silver Creek, Grace prepared in Mrs. Hollister's back room, the dressmaker fussing over final adjustments to the simple but elegant white gown. Through the window, she could see townspeople gathering at the small church, bringing flowers and food for the celebration to follow. "You look radiant, my dear," Mrs. Hollister said, stepping back to admire her work. "Gabriel Evans is a fortunate man." Grace smiled, touching the locket at her throat that had been her mother's. "I believe we're both fortunate. 4 months ago I was alone and headed for worthless land. Now you're about to marry the most eligible bachelor in the county and become mistress of a thriving ranch, Mrs. Hollister finished with a satisfied nod. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. Gabriel waited at the altar, his heart thundering in his chest until the moment Grace appeared in the doorway of the church. The sight of her, radiant in white with flowers in her hair, nearly brought him to his knees. As she walked toward him on the arm of Sheriff Cooper, who had offered to stand in for her father, Gabriel silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led her to find him that day on the prairie. Their vows were traditional, but spoken with such heartfelt conviction that many in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was the largest Silver Creek had seen in years. Tables groaned with food, music filled the town square, and even those who had initially viewed Grace with suspicion now toasted the happiness of the newlyweds with genuine warmth. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the square, Gabriel led his bride in their first dance as husband and wife. "Happy, Mrs. Evans," he murmured against her ear. "Completely," she answered, her eyes shining as she looked up at him. "Though I'm already looking forward to returning home." "Our home." The possessive pronoun sent a thrill through him. "Our home," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." They slipped away as the celebration continued, riding back to the ranch beneath a canopy of stars. The cabin had been transformed. In their absence, fresh curtains hung at the windows. Wildflowers filled every available container, and the new bed had been made up with linens that were Mrs. Donovan's wedding gift. Gabriel lifted Grace over the threshold, setting her down gently in the center of the room that now truly belonged to both of them. "Welcome home, wife," he said softly. Her answer was to draw his head down for a kiss that left no doubt about her feelings. The tenderness between them soon gave way to passion as they discovered each other fully for the first time, their union as natural and right as if they had been made for one another. Later, as moonlight spilled through the window and cast silver patterns across their entwined forms, Gabriel traced the curve of Grace's shoulder with gentle fingers. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met?" he asked. She turned in his arms, her expression drowsy with contentment. "I said many things, most of them scolding, as I recall. You said I'd forgotten to feed myself for days, that I'd do them no good half-starved." Grace smiled at the memory. "You were in a sorry state." "You were right," he admitted, pressing a kiss to her forehead. But I wasn't just starving for food. I was starving for purpose, for companionship, for love. And now, she asked, her hand coming to rest over his heart. Now, Gabriel replied, gathering her closer, I am the most well-fed man in the territory in every way that matters. 1 year later, Gabriel stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Grace walked across the yard with their 3-month-old daughter cradled in her arms. The morning sun caught the gold band on her finger, sending a flash of light that seemed to symbolize all they had built together. The Evans ranch was thriving beyond his most optimistic hopes. The bank loan had been paid in full, the herd had doubled in size, and the north pasture, still securely fenced, was lush with grass. Of the Pattersons, there had been no sign since their hasty departure, though occasional rumors placed them in various territories, always one step ahead of the law. "Are you daydreaming again?" Grace called as she approached, their daughter Sophie gurgling happily in her arms. "Reflecting," Gabriel corrected, reaching out to take the baby. "On how fortunate I am." Grace slipped her arm around his waist, leaning into him as they gazed out over their land. "We built this together," she reminded him. "So we did, Mrs. Evans, so we did." As if to punctuate the moment, Sophie let out a delighted laugh, reaching up to pat her father's face with tiny hands. Gabriel pressed a kiss to his daughter's forehead, then bent to capture his wife's lips in a tender kiss that held all the promise of their shared future. "What was that for?" Grace asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "For reminding a half-starved man that life required more than mere survival," Gabriel replied. "For teaching me to live again." In the distance, a rider approached, likely one of the hands they now employed, returning from checking the boundary fences. Life on the frontier would always bring challenges, but Gabriel Evans faced them now with a full heart and the knowledge that whatever came, he would never again face it alone.